All right, so good morning, everybody, and welcome to IGTV. My name is Joe Kincannon, and with me today is our guest, Craig Floyd. And Craig, you're now in full view of everybody. Craig is the CEO of the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund. And, well, this is the week of December 7th, 2010. The officer fatality issue for this part of the year, not a good one, Craig. I'll let you get into the details. Go ahead.
Well, unfortunately, Joe, as we talked about last month, the numbers of law enforcement officers killed in the line of duty has skyrocketed in 2010. We had what we considered a very good year in 2009 when it came to law enforcement safety. We lost 116 officers, still a very high figure, but that number of fatalities last year was the lowest in 50 years. You had to go back to 1959 to find a year when we had fewer law enforcement fatalities. That was the second year in a row that we'd seen a dramatic decrease in line of duty deaths. We were hoping that that was going to be the trend for the future. Unfortunately, 2010 has turned those numbers on its head. Basically, this year we've lost already 150 law enforcement officers across this country while performing their duties. And that compares to, again, all of last year, 116. So that's about a 45% increase over the same time last year. And we're seeing increases across the board. Gunfire related deaths up 20%. Traffic-related fatalities. There have been 70 fatalities related to traffic incidents. That's up 49% from last year. So dramatic increases in both firearms-related fatalities and traffic-related fatalities. During the month of November, 9 law enforcement officers lost their lives in the line of duty across this country. That's federal, state, and local officers. Very concerned about all of those cases, and I know, as you often say, we really should put some faces and a little more of the story behind those numbers. And we have a description of some of those deaths here with us today. If you'll allow me, I'd love to maybe highlight the officers, unfortunately, we lost in November of this year. Starting in Riverside, California, on November 7th, Ryan Bonaminio, and he was actually shot and killed while involved in a foot pursuit. He had actually stopped a tractor trailer. The driver was a suspected hit-and-run driver involved in an accident earlier. When he stopped the driver of that truck, there was a foot chase, and this officer was shot and killed. That was a Riverside, California police officer. Then on November 11th, David Grove of the Pennsylvania Game Commission, he was a wildlife conservation officer, shot and killed, again, making a traffic stop while investigating reports of ongoing poaching and illegal nighttime shooting. This is a real problem during hunting season, and the natural resource officers across this country are right in the middle of a lot of dangerous situations. The people they're dealing with have guns most of the time. Often alcohol is involved, and this became a very volatile situation, and unfortunately Wildlife Conservation Officer Grove was shot and killed. Kevin Roberts from Greene County, Georgia Sheriff's Office. There was a suspect that was involved in a narcotics investigation, and apparently Deputy Roberts, while at home, the suspect came, knocked on his door, and shot and killed this Deputy Roberts, when he answered the door. So even at the safety of your home, a law enforcement officer can sometimes be at risk because of the job they do. The suspect, in that case, by the way, killed himself right after he shot and killed Deputy Roberts. Gary Chapin, correctional officer, Crawford County, Pennsylvania Sheriff's Office. He was attacked and beaten by an inmate in the correctional facility he served at. Interesting, and I raise this point because when I think of correctional officers, often the forgotten and underappreciated officers of the law. They work behind prison walls, jail cells. Inmates are who they deal with every day. These are some of the toughest, worst human beings on the face of the earth that they have to live with virtually during their shift. And unfortunately, sometimes it results in their injuries or death. In this case, Correctional Officer Crawford, or Chapin, I'm sorry, was one of about 560 correctional officers nationwide who have been killed in the line of duty throughout our nation's history. Jonathan McDonald on November 15th, killed in a single vehicle accident. He was responding to another accident when he suffered this fatality. And I should point out that he served in Texas. He was with the Texas Department of Public Safety. Texas leads the nation, as they often do, I'm afraid, in the number of fatalities this year with 15, followed by California with 11, Illinois with 10, Florida with 7, and Georgia has 6, all in the top 5 among the states in the nation. Sam Brownlee, Weld County, Colorado Sheriff's Office, shot and killed on November 23rd. He was shot and killed attempting to capture a suspect following a high-speed chase. The suspect was wanted in a domestic violence case. And I should point out there, domestic violence is the most dangerous call an officer can go on. A third of all the assaults and injuries of officers occur in domestic violence situations. So you've got highly charged emotions, you've got alcohol and drugs often involved, and oftentimes a firearm is involved. So officers have to go into these volatile situations, try to be the peacemaker, and oftentimes they become the victim of that violence. Patrick Sirois, he's with the U.S. Department of Defense, a police officer struck and killed by a vehicle while assisting at the scene of an accident. A very dangerous situation for officers across this country. You would think that's a fairly benign situation when we pass them on the side of a roadway. In fact, about 16 officers a year are struck and killed, oftentimes while assisting motorists at accident scenes, directing traffic at a construction site, that sort of thing. And I should point out there's a new law, fairly new law, that's now been enacted by 48 states across this country. It's called Move Over and Slow Down. And if you are in your vehicle and you see an emergency vehicle on the side of the road with the lights flashing, as oftentimes is the case, you should move over and slow down to give that officer an added margin of safety, because again, 16 officers a year on average are struck and killed, and we, the driving public, can make it safer for them by just following those basic rules of, if you have that extra lane to move over, do so, but always slow down when you see an emergency vehicle on the side of the roadway. Michael Flisk, and this was a Chicago police officer, shot and killed, one of 6 Chicago officers, I should point out, who have died in the line of duty this year. Chicago has suffered terribly. They've lost a lot of law enforcement this year, and we certainly, our hearts and prayers, thoughts certainly go out to the Chicago police officers. This officer was shot and killed while processing the scene of a vehicle burglary inside an alley garage. Now, you would think that, you know, you watch CSI on television, for example, and that's the crime scene investigators. You would think they would not be at risk when they come in after the crimes occurred. They're doing the investigation to look for clues that may help solve the crime. This officer was doing just that when he was shot and killed. Also shot and killed in that situation was the burglary victim, a retired police officer who was shot and killed by this 19-year-old parolee who was arrested soon after for the shootings. John Paskowitz, he's a senior corrections officer with the Maine Department of Corrections. Unfortunately, he suffered a fatal heart attack while participating in a mandatory training exercise. We have more than 800 officers whose names are on the National Memorial who have all died from heart attacks and strokes that occurred during very strenuous situations. The job is very stressful. Oftentimes you go from very peaceful, kind of a resting heart rate, if you will, not much happening at that moment. All of a sudden your heart rate spikes because now you've got to chase a rape murder suspect. You get a call about a burglary in progress, an armed robbery in progress. You've got to chase a fleeing felon at high rates of speed. Causes tremendous stress on your heart. Training exercises can be very stressful, and even if officers are in good shape, sometimes underlying heart disease creates a potential deadly situation. And unfortunately, that's what happened with John Paskowitz on November 26th. So those are the 9 officers we lost in November. Hope that helps to put a little bit of a face behind those terrible numbers. And unfortunately, we're in December now, the holiday season, which tends to be one of the most deadly periods for law enforcement of the year. A lot of alcohol and drugs, a lot of people that are depressed perhaps. Domestic violence situations tend to spike around this time of year. So this is a time we got to really be on the lookout for officers, especially on the roadways. A lot of drunk drivers out there this time of year, and we need to give them that added margin of safety. Move over and slow down when you see an officer on the side of a roadway.
You know, Craig, the Move Over and Slow Down campaign, you know, that sounds like something that could really take off. You know, it's you know, sounds like something they should be putting on bumper stickers on cars all over the place, so that people really understand that. You know, it's on the back of fire trucks all over the place. You know, stay back 200 feet. At least it is all over here in the city of New York. It'd be a nice thing to see different police departments coming out with, or maybe one of the national federal agencies come out with a campaign for that, so they can supply those posters or perhaps bumper stickers out there, so we can bring these numbers, you know, back into, you know, one number is too many, but I mean, you know, these seem like they're, you know, quite a few people who have passed on this year.
And you're exactly right. We're always troubled by, especially cases where there seems to be an answer, a way to prevent those types of deaths from occurring. If we, the driving public, just behaved a little more responsibly, weren't talking on our cell phones, weren't drinking and driving, be attentive whenever you're behind the wheel, certainly, but give that officer that added margin of safety. And I'll tell you, there's a great statistic that really bears out what you're saying, Joe. They did a survey and found that about 70% of Americans had no idea there was such a law as Move Over and Slow Down. So we have a lot of work to do when it comes to public awareness, and that's really what that law is all about. It's tough to enforce, obviously, but it's more about, do you care about the life of a police officer, an emergency medical technician, for example, or a firefighter on the side of a roadway? Is their life important to you? And if it is, and I hope the answer for all of us is it certainly is, then give them that added margin of safety. We can make a difference.
Well, we'll do this. If you could have a member of your staff email me with the legislation or the law itself, we'll link to that, and we'll start promoting it up here as well, and maybe we can get people to pay better attention to it, because driver responsibility is important. And as you indicate, you know, one of the deadliest times of the year is not just for police officers but for citizens as well, is this holiday period we all go through. You know, these are, in some cases, you know, the high holy holidays, certainly for the Catholic Church. You know, Hanukkah just passed, and the Muslim holidays are coming up, you know, with Ramadan and all these different things. People tend to gather, they get together in holiday parties and things like this, you know, but they've got to remember the safety focus of all this, and the safety of, you know, themselves as well as the people that they're interacting with. So, you know, we want everybody to have fun, of course, you know, be cheery and be a delight to be around. You know, we don't want them to be a stuffed shirt, but at the same time, they also have to focus in.
And I think you raise a very good point. And what we need to realize, too, is that these men and women in law enforcement oftentimes don't get to share the holidays with their families and friends. They're out on the streets trying to protect the rest of us. I can't tell you how many officers I've seen over the years who die on New Year's Eve. You know, the rest of us are out having a great time with our friends and family. And there is too much drinking going on, because then the people get behind the wheels after parties. And unfortunately, oftentimes the officers end up dying in the line of duty because you know, people were being irresponsible. So think about being responsible, number one, so you make it safer for our officers. Think about them, but also think about their families, the sacrifices officers make for us day in and day out. When we're home with our families around the fireplace at Christmas and New Year's, these officers are out on the roadways trying to make it safer for the rest of us. And these are just some things to think about. We owe a huge debt of gratitude to all law enforcement officers, but especially during this very difficult holiday season.
Well,